I want you to think back to the last time you felt completely safe. Maybe you were home, lights on, door locked, familiar sounds around you. Nothing wrong, nothing out of place. That's exactly how each of these people felt, right up until they didn't. These are 3 true stories submitted by real people. Babysitters who thought they were just doing a normal job on a normal night. The kind of night you've probably had a version of yourself. Quiet house, kids asleep, nothing to worry about. But something was wrong from the beginning. They just didn't know it yet. Stay with me. These ones get under your skin. Story 1, The Basement Light, submitted by Marissa T., 22, Ohio. I'd been babysitting for the Hendersons for almost 2 years by the time this happened. They were a good family, normal. Mom was a pediatric nurse. Dad did something in logistics. I never fully understood it. They had 2 kids, a 7-year-old named Caleb and a 4-year-old named Lily. Sweet kids, easy kids, the kind you actually look forward to watching. Their house was a 2-story colonial in a quiet neighborhood. You know the type. Manicured lawn, motion sensor porch light, a Ring doorbell they'd bought after a package got stolen. The kind of house that feels like nothing bad could ever happen there. I'd been there so many times I knew the layout better than my own apartment. Kitchen to the left, living room straight ahead, kids' rooms upstairs, finished basement below. They used the basement as a playroom. Bean bags, a TV, Caleb's Lego sets, Lily's art table. That Saturday in October, the Hendersons were going to a colleague's dinner party. They'd be back by 11, maybe 11:30. I showed up at 6. Mrs. Henderson ran through the usual checklist: bedtime snacks, Lily's nightlight, Caleb's reading book. Mr. Henderson double-checked the door lock while she talked, the way he always did. Force of habit. They left at 6:15. The first 2 hours were completely normal. We had dinner, mac and cheese, because Caleb had veto power over everything. We watched a movie in the living room. Lily fell asleep on me before it was even halfway through, which she always did. Caleb lasted until about 8:40 before admitting he was tired. I carried Lily up, tucked them both in, turned on Lily's nightlight, a little crescent moon that cast soft yellow light across the ceiling, and went back downstairs. Normal, easy, familiar. I made myself tea in the kitchen and settled onto the couch with my phone. The house made the small sounds old houses make. The refrigerator humming. The heat clicking on. A car passing outside. Nothing I hadn't heard 100 times. I was maybe 40 minutes into a show. I'd been watching on my laptop when I noticed it. A thin strip of light under the basement door. I remember looking at it for a second and feeling not scared, confused mostly. I was certain I hadn't been down there that night. The kids hadn't either. We'd come straight from school pickup to dinner. The basement light wasn't on a timer. It didn't have a sensor. My first thought was that I'd left it on from a previous visit. Maybe last weekend, when I'd helped Caleb find a Lego piece down there. I was pretty sure I hadn't. But it was the only rational explanation, so I accepted it and went back to my show. That's the thing about early warning signs. They're easy to explain away. Because most of the time there is a rational explanation. The problem is when you're wrong about which time that is. I didn't think about the light again for almost an hour. At around 10, I got up to refill my tea. Walked past the basement door. The light was still on. I told myself again I left it on. And then almost without deciding to, I reached for the door handle to go down and turn it off. I opened the door, and I heard it, a soft sound. From the bottom of the stairs, like something being set down gently, like something trying not to make noise. I froze. I stood in that doorway for what felt like a full minute, not breathing. The light was on, the main overhead light, not just the lamp near the TV, the full light, the one you'd turn on if you needed to see the whole room. I told myself it was the house settling. Old houses do that. Basements creak. Pipes knock. I had a whole list of explanations ready, and I was cycling through all of them, while standing completely still in that doorway. And then Caleb's voice came from right behind me. I nearly fell down the stairs. He was standing in the hallway in his pajamas, squinting in the light. "Marissa," he said in that flat, matter-of-fact way 7-year-olds say things, "why is the man still down there?" I turned around slowly. "What man, buddy?" "The man that was down there when we got home. He said he was fixing something. I saw him when I came down for water before dinner." Before dinner. Over 4 hours ago. My mouth went dry. I remember very clearly trying to keep my voice calm. I crouched down to his level and I said, as evenly as I could, "Caleb, I need you to go back to your room, wake up your sister, and stay there with the door closed. Can you do that for me?" He looked at me for a second. Kids can tell when adults are scared. He knew something was wrong. He nodded and went. I didn't go down those stairs. I want to be honest about that. Every part of my body was screaming not to. Instead, I walked quickly and quietly to the front door, unlocked it, stepped outside onto the porch, and called 911. I told them I had reason to believe someone was in the basement of the home. I gave them the address. They told me to stay outside and stay on the line. I stood on that porch in the cold for 6 minutes before the first patrol car arrived. 2 officers went in. I stayed outside with the 911 dispatcher, watching the lights move through the windows, ground floor then downstairs. Then, stillness. Then one officer came back out. "There's a man in the basement," he said. "He's in custody." He was a man in his mid-30s. No ID. No connection to the family that anyone could determine. He had apparently come in through the basement window, the one behind Caleb's Lego shelves, which the Hendersons had left unlocked because it was small and high off the ground. And they didn't think anyone could get through it. He could. He had. And he had been down there for hours, apparently just waiting. Waiting for what? Nobody said. The officers didn't tell me, and I didn't ask because I think some part of me understood that the answer would be worse than the question. The Hendersons were home within 20 minutes of the arrest. Mrs. Henderson cried. Mr. Henderson stood in the driveway with his hand over his mouth, not saying anything, just looking at the basement window. Caleb had seen the man before dinner and thought he was a repairman. A child's logic. Adults in houses have a reason to be there. I think about the 40 minutes I sat on that couch, with the light under the door, convincing myself I'd left it on. I think about how long he'd been down there before I'd even arrived. I don't babysit anymore. Story 2. She kept pointing at the closet, submitted by Derek M., 27, Georgia. This was 6 years ago, but I remember it the way you remember car accidents. Clearly, in pieces, out of order. My girlfriend at the time, Janelle, had a younger sister named Priya. She was 5. Their parents were going through a rough stretch. both like working extra hours, a lot of tension at home. And Janelle and I had started watching Priya on Friday nights to give them a break. It wasn't a big deal. Priya was a quiet kid, thoughtful, the kind of little girl who would sit and draw for an hour without making a sound. Janelle's parents lived in a townhouse, 3 floors, basement garage, main floor, bedrooms upstairs. Nice place, newer build, the kind of home with thin walls and that slight echo that newer construction has. On this particular Friday, Janelle got called into work. She was a shift manager at a restaurant and somebody called out. She felt terrible about it, but I told her it was fine. I'd watched Priya myself. I'd done it before a few times, always without any issue. Janelle left around 6. Her parents were working until at least 10. Priya and I had dinner. I made grilled cheese, which she inspected very seriously before eating it, which she always did. We watched cartoons. Around 7:30, she asked if we could play in her room, so we went upstairs. Her room was at the end of the hall. Pink walls, a canopy bed, stuffed animals arranged in very specific order along the headboard. She would correct you immediately if you moved one wrong. There was a closet on the far wall, one of those standard folding door closets, slightly bigger than average. We played with her dolls for a while. She was good at creating elaborate narratives for them, little dramas that made a surprising amount of emotional sense for a 5-year-old. Around 8:15, I told her it was almost bedtime. She nodded seriously and started putting her dolls away. That's when I noticed she kept glancing at the closet. Not in the way kids glance at things, in a focused way, a returning way, like she was checking something. Every 30 seconds or so, her eyes would move to the closet door, hold for a moment, then come back. "You okay, Priya?" "Yes," she said simply, and kept putting her dolls away. I let it go. Kids have things, phases. Priya sometimes had little rituals I didn't fully understand, and she wasn't a kid who explained herself much. I got her into bed and read her a story. About halfway through the book, she sat up. "Derek," she said, "is the man coming back?" I stopped reading. "What man?" She pointed directly at the closet. My first reaction, and I'm a little embarrassed to admit this, was that I was annoyed, because I assumed it was a stall tactic. Kids say things to delay bedtime, scary things, funny things, anything to keep you in the room a little longer. I've heard parents talk about it. So I said, "There's no man, Priya. It's just your closet. You want me to show you?" She shook her head quickly. He told me not to open it. The room felt very quiet all of a sudden. I kept my voice measured. "When did you see a man?" "Before dinner. He was in there." She pointed again. "He said stay out and be a good girl and be quiet." I stood up. I want to describe what it feels like when your body understands something before your brain catches up. There's a shift, a kind of physical clarity. Everything suddenly feels very real and very immediate. I took Priya's hand, walked her out of the room, went downstairs, out the front door, and sat her on the front step. I called Janelle first, because my hands were shaking and I wasn't thinking straight. She told me to call 911, which I then did. The responding officer opened the closet with his hand on his holster. There was nobody in it, but there was a duffel bag on the floor, pushed into the corner, under some of Priya's winter coats. It wasn't Priya's. It wasn't her parents'. It contained a change of clothes, a prepaid phone, zip ties, and a folding knife. Somebody had been in that closet. They'd left before the officers arrived. The window at the end of the hall was open, the screen pushed out. The roof of the garage was directly below it. They never identified who it was. The duffel bag had no prints. The prepaid phone was wiped. Whoever he was, he'd entered through the garage while I was making dinner, gone upstairs, hidden in the closet, told a 5-year-old to be quiet and stay out, and then either panicked when he heard me come upstairs or waited until he had a window to leave. Priya never told me while we were inside because he had told her not to. A 5-year-old followed instructions given to her by a stranger hiding in her closet because that's what children do. They're told to listen to adults. She told me once we were going to bed. Once the routine told her she was supposed to be honest. I think about what he was waiting for. I think about what the zip ties were for. I try not to think about those things for too long. The window with the broken screen lock. Janelle's dad had meant to fix it for 3 weeks. 3 weeks. Story 3. The Spare Room. Submitted by Carla D., 34, Oregon. I have to preface this by saying that by the time this happened, I'd been babysitting professionally for almost 8 years. I had a profile on 3 different platforms. I had background checks, references, a CPR certification. I was not a careless person. I was not someone who made assumptions. I tell you that so you understand how easy it is for this to happen to anyone. The family was new. A referral through a mutual contact, which is how I preferred to meet clients. A couple in their late 30s, 2 daughters. Mara, who was 9, and Sophie, who was 6. The father traveled for work. The mother, whose name was Diane, was a landscape architect with evening client meetings twice a month. She needed someone reliable on those nights. That was the arrangement. Their house was lovely. A craftsman bungalow at the end of a tree-lined street. Well-maintained. Warm feeling. Diane was meticulous, and she showed me everything on my first visit. Fire extinguisher location, first aid kit, emergency contacts printed and laminated on the refrigerator. A good parent, a careful one. There was a door at the end of the main hall that she didn't open on my walkthrough. I noticed it, the way you notice things peripherally. She said, "That's just the spare room. It's storage right now. My husband's unpacking boxes from when we moved. The girls know it's off limits. You won't need to go in there." Reasonable. I didn't think about it again. I watched the girls 3 times over the following month. Everything was exactly what it appeared to be. Mara was bookish and a little intense. Sophie was affectionate and loud. The evenings were easy. Homework, dinner, baths, bed. Diane was always back by 9:30. Good experience all around. The 4th visit was a Thursday in November. Diane left at 5:30. By 8, both girls were in bed. At 8:45, Sophie appeared at the top of the stairs. "Carla," she said quietly, "Mara told me not to tell you, but the man in the spare room is making noise again." I looked up from my book. "What did you say?" She looked suddenly uncertain, the way kids look when they realize they've maybe said something wrong. "Mara said you'd be scared and it would be a whole thing. But I don't like the sound." I stood up, slow and even, the way you move when you want to appear calm. "What kind of sound, honey?" "Like when you move boxes, that sliding sound." I went upstairs, got Sophie into her room, then knocked on Mara's door, opened it. Mara was sitting up in bed with the look of a child who has been caught. "Mara," I said, keeping my voice steady, "how long has there been someone in that spare room?" She stared at me. "You can see them?" "I haven't looked yet. Tell me." "A few weeks," she said quietly. "He came out once when Mom and Dad were at the store and I was watching Sophie. He said he needed to stay there for a little while and he wasn't going to hurt anyone and we should just pretend he wasn't there. He said if we told someone, it would make everything complicated." 9 years old. She had carried this alone for weeks. A man had told her not to tell, had offered a reasonable-sounding adult logic for secrecy, and she had kept it because she didn't know what else to do. I told both girls to go into Mara's room, lock the door, and not open it until they heard my voice or the police. I went downstairs, out the front door, called 911 from the porch. I did not wait for anything after that. Officers entered the house. 8 minutes later, he was in the spare room. He was a man in his late 40s. He had been living in that room, genuinely living there, for at minimum 3 to 4 weeks based on what was found. A sleeping bag, food wrappers, water bottles, a phone charger plugged into the wall outlet behind a stack of boxes. The family had moved in 5 months prior. The working theory, though I don't know if it was ever confirmed, was that he had been in the house before they moved in, that he had simply stayed. He had been in that house when they unpacked, when they had family dinners, when the girls did their homework, when Diane showed me the spare room and called it storage, the slide-in sound of boxes. He'd been moving them to get to his sleeping bag. He was a drifter with prior trespassing convictions. No history of violence, which is probably the closest thing to good news in this story. Diane called me the next morning. She could barely speak. She said she'd passed that door every single day. Every single day. There's a version of every story where you open the door earlier, where you don't explain something away, where you listen to what a child tells you the moment they say it. I keep those versions close to me now. All of them. Outro 3. Ordinary nights. 3 people doing exactly what they were supposed to be doing. Careful people. Experienced people. People who locked the doors and knew the layout and had a plan. It didn't matter, because the danger was already inside. The spare room, the closet, the basement, the part of the house nobody opens. If you take anything from these stories, let it be this. When a child tells you something is wrong, stop what you're doing. Stop explaining it away. Stop finishing your tea or your chapter or your episode. Stop and listen. Because they don't have enough fear yet to talk themselves out of what they saw. If you have your own true scary story, drop it in the comments. I read every single one. And if this kept you up, good. Lock your doors,